Chris couldn't stop thinking about his ex-wife Sabrina with another man. The thought burned inside him, filling him with anger and desperation. He grabbed his phone, needing answers, and called her. Sabrina's phone rang. She didn't even have to look, she already knew. Devin asked who it was, but she stayed silent. Taking a deep breath, she picked up. His voice hit her instantly, slurred, bitter, barely holding it together. He scoffed at her choice, saying he didn't approve of Devin. How could she go from him to someone like that? Then came the accusations. Cheating. Betrayal. Sabrina stood frozen listening. She didn't fight back. She didn't explain. She just let his words wash over her, closing her eyes, pulling her back to the moment when it all began. The moment their love started to fall apart not too long ago, when Sabrina practiced her words over and over. She was going to tell Chris the good news. She was pregnant. He was going to be a father. This was supposed to be a special day. But when she arrived at his door, a guard stood there. Chris had ordered that she stay outside. The hurt was immediate, but before she could question it, the guard casually mentioned that Chris also wanted his special chicken soup. He feared he was coming down with a cold. A cold. That was all he cared about. At that moment, all she could think about was the man who got her into this messy relationship. Chris's father, Raymond. While making his soup, Sabrina remembered the night Raymond begged her to marry Chris on his deathbed. Chris had loved her best friend, Brenda. But Raymond saw through Brenda. He had confronted her, offering her a blank check to leave Chris forever. Without hesitation, she took the money and abandoned Chris. Sabrina had known Chris would never forgive his father if he learned the truth. She had agreed to the marriage, hoping that one day Chris would also love her, hoping he would change, but he never did. Chris never treated her like a wife. When Raymond passed, Chris had finally agreed to marry Sabrina, but only under his own cruel terms. Sabrina would give him a child, and in return she would have the comforts of his wealth, but she would never have his love. For years she had endured the pain. She had suffered in silence. She had watched him bring women into their home. And now, the worst has happened. Sabrina saw Brenda stepping out of Chris's bedroom, confident, smug. Sabrina thought of the time when she used to be her best friend, and when Sabrina told her that she had a crush on Chris and was planning to ask him out. Brenda seduced him before Sabrina could confess her feelings to Chris. And no, Brenda was back. She had tolerated many things, but not this, not Brenda. Chris reminded her of their arrangement. She was nothing more than the mother of his future child, but she had failed at that. Sabrina had tried and tried, but the miscarriages had broken her while Chris was having multiple affairs. And now he told her that Brenda was pregnant. He had reconnected with Brenda while in Europe, and she had given him what Sabrina could not. He had no further use for her. He wanted Brenda to move in. Sabrina felt something snap inside her. He had taken everything from her, and she gave everything to him without any hesitation. In a moment of defiance, Sabrina declared that she would no longer be his obedient wife. She demanded that Brenda leave, or she would. Chris, taken aback, offered her money and mansions to leave, but Sabrina didn't want that. She wanted the house they had shared, the house that she promised Chris's father, Raymond, that it'll never fall into the wrong hands, especially not Chris's. She made her demand. Brenda protested, but Chris silenced her. Sabrina had been loyal for years, and if she wanted the house, she could have it. Brenda would get him. That should have been enough. But Brenda wasn't happy. She wanted the house too. Chris dismissed her complaints. He had given his word. Later that day, the divorce papers arrived. Chris was caught off guard. How had she prepared them so quickly? He hesitated. He needed time to read them. Sabrina agreed and gave him until the next day. He and Brenda had to be out by then. Brenda was hungry, so Chris demanded the soup Sabrina had made. But Sabrina, having had enough, turned to the housekeeper and told her to take the meal home to her family instead. Furious, Chris confronted her, but she stood her ground. She was no longer his obedient wife. He had mistreated her for too long. Now, she was done. Chris ordered soup for Brenda, but she complained and whined, but he didn't care. Something about losing Sabrina forever unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. He barely touched his food. He didn't understand why, but he found himself craving something else. Sabrina's cooking, her warmth. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. Later at night, he found himself in her room. He wanted her, just for one night. And despite everything, she wanted him too. The next morning, Sabrina woke up, ashamed of her weakness. But there was no time for regret. She had to leave. She had to be free. She had to finalize the divorce. Brenda was waiting for her, smug and confident. She told Sabrina she would never take Chris away from her. Sabrina only smiled. She didn't want him. But before she left, she made sure Brenda knew the truth. She knew about the money Brenda had taken from Raymond. She knew Brenda had sold Chris out for a price. At the courthouse, the final moment arrived. Chris hesitated for just a second. Sabrina did not. She signed the papers, and in an instant, their marriage was over. Chris stood there and told her that he had never meant to mistreat her. Sabrina told him that it was too late for that and wished him the best with Brenda. As she walked away, free for the first time in years, she saw him watching her. His gaze darkened when a car pulled up. A man stepped out, opening the door for Sabrina. Chris's hands clenched into fists. Who was he? Jealousy burned through him. She was his wife. No, not anymore. But but still the thought of another man taking his place so soon unsettled him. He wanted answers, and for the first time he felt something he never thought he would: regret. He ordered to follow her car. On the other hand, Sabrina was relieved to see her brother Devin and thanked him for picking her up. It was finally over. Her divorce from Chris was official. Devin was happy for her, but also skeptical. He never understood why she married Chris in the first place. Sabrina had made a promise to Chris's dying father to stay with him, but that promise had cost her so much. Yet, she had gained something valuable: the Taylor mansion. Raymond, Chris's father, had left it to her in his will, not wanting it to fall into the wrong hands. Devin urged her to cut all ties with Chris, but Sabrina wasn't sure if she could. She placed a protective hand on her belly. She was carrying Chris's child, and he didn't know. Devin suggested grabbing lunch and meeting someone important. Meanwhile, Chris was desperate to uncover Sabrina's new relationship. To create a cover, he called Brenda, his mistress, and asked her to meet him at a restaurant. He needed her presence as an excuse to be there. At the restaurant, Devin and Sabrina were catching up. Just then, Brenda appeared. The sight of her made Sabrina furious. Brenda mocked Sabrina for moving on too quickly, but Sabrina held her ground, throwing Brenda off guard. Chris arrived, bitterness evident in his words. He couldn't stand how confident Sabrina had become. Seeing her with other men made his blood boil, and he told Devin that she can't have kids to insult her further. Then, a new figure entered the picture: Martin Dean, a handsome and successful-looking man. Martin was polite, but Chris saw him as just another rival, but Martin dismissed him. Martin proposed a deal to Sabrina to help her turn the mansion into a profitable business. Sabrina was skeptical but intrigued. She agreed to hear more at a private meeting. Later, Devin took Sabrina home, where she finally told her family about her divorce and pregnancy. Her father, a successful businessman, was proud of her for leaving Chris. Lizzie, her sister, was furious about Brenda's involvement, but the family rallied around Sabrina, offering her a place to stay and a fresh start at a new home that her brother Devin had designed for her. Devin reminded her of the next day's doctor's appointment for her pregnancy. The next day at the hospital, the doctor shared that Sabrina and her child are happy and healthy. She asked about the father's situation, to which Sabrina told her that the father was no longer involved and that she had the support of her family. As she left the hospital, she heard Chris calling her name. He approached with a mix of curiosity and concern, commenting on her appearance. Sabrina quickly deflected, saying she was there for routine tests. She knew Chris had a reputation for being unfaithful, and she wanted to keep him from guessing the truth. Chris, however, was suspicious. He accused her of checking for STDs, hinting that she might be seeing someone else. Sabrina felt her heart race as Chris pulled her closer, demanding to know if she was pregnant. Panic surged through her, and just as she was about to respond, Devin, her brother, arrived to intervene. The tension escalated as Chris and Devin exchanged harsh words. Chris, still reeling from his recent divorce, lashed out, blaming Sabrina for his problems. Devin stood up for his sister, reminding Chris of his failures. Sabrina felt trapped between the two men, urging Devin to get going. Later, Chris met with Brenda, his new girlfriend, at the hospital. He had been trying to distract himself from thoughts of Sabrina, but it was clear he was still haunted by her. Brenda, eager for Chris's attention, tried to engage him, but he was distant. After leaving the hospital in the car, Chris was restless, his mind racing with thoughts of Sabrina. Brenda, sitting beside him, felt the tension. She was frustrated that Chris was still so focused on Sabrina, especially since she was carrying his child. She wished they could move on from Sabrina once and for all. Chris, however, was troubled. He had concerns that Sabrina might be pregnant with his child. He couldn't shake the feeling that whoever she was dating was only after his money. Brenda pointed out that Sabrina was playing mind games with him, making him doubt himself. But Chris snapped back, telling Brenda to be quiet and just look pretty, as if that was all she was good for. He often used physical affection as a way to keep Brenda close, but right now, he was too preoccupied with thoughts of Sabrina. Brenda insisted they needed to show Sabrina they wouldn't be pushed around, but Chris told her that he needed to handle things with Sabrina himself. He didn't want Brenda interfering, and asked her to get out of the car, while Chris instructed the driver to take him to Boyd's pub, where he hoped to gather more information about Sabrina from his doctor friend, Danny. At home, Brenda received a call from her mother, who was worried about her reputation. She had heard rumors about Chris and wanted to know what was going on. Brenda lied, trying to keep her mother from finding out about the shady dealings with Chris's family. Her mother warned her not to get involved in anything illegal, but Brenda brushed it off. After hanging up, Brenda received another call, this time from her father. He was angry, asking why she seemed uninterested in their plan to get rich. Brenda tried to explain that there had been a problem with the doctor they hired to cover for her fake pregnancy as she was moving away, and they needed another plan to hide the truth that Brenda was not pregnant at all and was lying to take over Chris's property and mansion. Her father insisted she keep sleeping with Chris and convince him to marry her to make their plan work. Brenda felt a surge of determination. If Chris missed Sabrina, she would give him every reason to forget about her by seducing him. Meanwhile, Chris was at the pub, drowning his thoughts in alcohol. He couldn't stop thinking about Sabrina and the possibility that she was pregnant. He confided in his best friend, Danny, about his suspicions. Danny warned Chris that trying to access Sabrina's medical records would be illegal, but as his friend, he would help him. Chris was desperate to know the truth. He felt a mix of anger and longing, unsure of what to do next. He couldn't shake the feeling that Sabrina was hiding something important from him. As Chris drank more, he decided to call Sabrina. He wanted to confront her about her feelings and the truth behind their divorce. When Sabrina answered, Chris's words were laced with frustration. He couldn't believe she had moved on so quickly, especially with someone he deemed unattractive. Sabrina, feeling hurt by Chris's accusations, reminded him that he had married her out of obligation, not love. She had left him because he had cheated on her with Brenda. The conversation escalated, and Sabrina hung up. The call ended with Chris feeling more humiliated than ever, and Sabrina was feeling a mix of anger and sadness. She had left Chris knowing she wasn't wanted, but his mixed signals made it hard for her to move on. Back at home, Brenda was frustrated with Chris's drunken state. She had dressed up for him, hoping to seduce him and forget Sabrina, but he was still lost in thoughts of his ex-wife, Sabrina. When Chris drunkenly called out Sabrina's name, as she was the only woman he could think of, Brenda was furious. She had done everything to win him, but he was still obsessed with his ex-wife.
Hey, I'm Sabrina. If you're wondering what happens next, download the Pocket FM app now and listen to the exciting episodes of Lose You to Love Me.